Hello everybody, my name's KyloNeko, and hi, I would like to introduce you to this video that I decided to make right before Windows 10 was about to die. Yeah! Anyways, I do want to touch on a lot of things, especially things I've had on my mind, especially when it comes to Windows itself. Because I used to use Windows for like a long time, for at least 7 years, and the fact that I was using it for that long, and I eventually ended up switching over to Linux due to various reasonings, which are very valid on my end. I would hope that people would actually find the way to move to a Linux distribution or anything at that matter. Basically, what I'm saying is Windows 10 is going to die, and it's going to die very soon. Now, you might have your options, such as Windows 10 LTSC or Tiny 11, but those are not options that actually fix the problem. The problem is we have a company, or a private company by the name of Microsoft, who is going off, not only killing probably one of their better OSs, they're trying to shoehorn people into getting a new computer, as well as trying to shoehorn people into at least trying to get on Windows 11. And Windows 11 isn't doing too good. It's not doing too good at all. And that's a scary thing people should understand. Windows 11 is probably their worst performing district. It's worse than Windows 8. It's worse than 8.1. How do you have a OS worse than Windows 8? How did you manage to do that? But there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and that would be Linux. Yeah, that's right, I said it, it's Linux. Now, I do want to go over some things, especially when it comes to certain things like, you know, why are we even at this point? Why did I even switch? Why did I even do it, you know? Well, let's go over why. Let's go over exactly as to why I even switched to begin with. Now, to understand why, what the fuck? Now to understand why I even switched. Alright, now to understand why I even switched to begin with, I'm going to take you on a ride. Now, when Microsoft started to introduce Windows Recall, I first got notification of it via Twitter. Well, I had immediately known that this was spyware. And the fact that this is basically spyware, it had red flags go off. This was May 21st of 2024. This was exactly, or very close to a week after I switched. Because I switched in May. It was at the end of May, but it was still around that time. Microsoft announces Recall AI for Windows 11, a new feature that runs in the background and records everything you see and do on your Windows PC. Well, reading that, and with AI attached to it, with AI already getting a bad rap as it is when it comes to these companies doing it unethically, it's kind of a hard thing to even recommend want to use Windows at that point. So Microsoft then makes a post on their Windows account. Copilot plus PC. Welcome to a new era of AI. New era of spyware. That's basically what it is. Basically what Recall is, to summarize it. Microsoft Recall in Copilot. They run on your computer. They are At the time, you could disable it, but now you can't, which is even worse for Windows 11. You have this thing constantly running in the background, taking up resources on your computer, on the hardware that you bought, either from the store or you built, right? You're losing out on resources. Not only are you losing out on resources, you also have an AI periodically taking pictures and snapshots of your computer. Now, they've done this before in a way where they were like able to back your computer up to the cloud. That's different. This is where it constantly takes pictures and they get sent off to a cloud. That means anything that you could be looking at, they could be taking pictures of. And it doesn't matter what your computer has on it. It doesn't matter if you have NDA stuff. It doesn't matter if you're even watching, you know, hentai. But even that, like, even if you're watching a bunch of stuff like that, it's basically, there's no privacy with your computer. Your privacy has went out the window. Windows literally took Windows 10, said, you know what? Fuck you. You're no longer going to use Windows 10. We want you to use Windows 11. And we want to know everything you're doing. Now, some people might be going, okay, well, on paper, this seems like it's a good idea. You know, they get back everything up. They can kind of keep track of what's going on and everything. You know, if you need to get to that exact moment or exact file system into your computer, you can do that. Like, the technology's there, but in any other Linux distribution, in Windows 10, you can just find files anyways if you know where you're looking. So it's kind of like hard for me to even recommend one to use Windows 11. Because not only that, they were fucking you over all the way back in May, going into June. So Windows 10 then decided to state that they're going to end support. Windows 10 support ends on October 14th. The support for Windows 10 is going to be ending the day this video gets posted. And they want you to update. They want you to update. They want you to install this trash. Right? They want you to install this trash. No longer get security updates. Now, starting out, people, past the date, if you're still on Windows 10 and you haven't switched over to LTSC Enterprise or started using Tiny 11, after a while, those security updates will stop. Like the existing ones that were already installed, those will no longer cease to protect you. Unfortunately, with the way the Windows is right now, the ecosystem is entirely huge, so there's more incentive for hackers and more incentive for people to fuck with your computer or even steal your information. Now, there's going to be a lot of computers that aren't even going to be able to leave yet. As of Windows Central, according to what they're saying, 60% of PCs in Enterprise, they switched to 11, right? But 40% of those cannot move to Windows 11. The cool thing about Windows 10 is how many things can Windows 10 be installed on? If you look at the requirements and specs, 1 gigahertz processor, 1 gigabyte for 32-bit version, 32 gigabytes or more, right? These are bare minimum specs. This could be installed on a variety of things. Not to mention, you don't even have to meet the specs for Windows 10. You could just install it on literally anything. Let me take a look at the specifications for Windows 11. Here are the system requirements for Windows 11. One gigahertz or more, right? 4 gigabytes, right? 64 gigabytes, right? Now, you might go, oh, well, this isn't too much of a jump from Windows 10 to Windows 11, right? The problem is, Windows 11 is so fucking unoptimized that even if you had a computer like this that could try to run it, like those little small computers that can hook into a TV, for example, or an Intel NUC or something like that, it's probably gonna run like shit. it's probably gonna run like fucking shit. Windows 10, it'll probably run a little bad, but it won't run horribly wrong. But Windows 11, it's probably gonna run like shit. This right here, all this shit right here, it's a fucking lie, because there's no way that's gonna work. Now with Tiny 11, maybe, you know, but that's not the point. The point is you want to get one, you know, if you're wanting to switch away from Windows 10 or Windows 11 to Linux, there's some things you need to understand. Anti-cheat games. Some anti-cheat games might have problems. There's good sites like Are We Anti-Cheat Yet? There's also sites like ProtonDB, which tell you approximately like what can happen and how you can get a game to work. And honestly, 26k games working, that's a lot of fucking games. And that's a very small number in comparison to maybe 700-ish games that don't work very well or at all. Or the 500-ish games that do work on Linux just fine. Like, that's not a huge number. And when you're choosing your Linux distribution, for example, you know, you kind of want to know where you're going to want to start. Well, there's a site called DistroC, and DistroC is... Oh, wow. That's actually cool. Anyways, there's a site called DistroC. And look at all these. These are all distros, right? Say I wanted to try out... Let's say I wanted to try something out that I've never tried before, right? Let's see here. Open Indie... No, I'm not trying that one. Let's see here. Calibri OS. I'm not trying that one. Hold on. FreeBSD. Say I want to try out FreeBSD. You know, the latest version of FreeBSD. Just, you know, you just try it out on DistroC. So, say you want to try out a distribution, right? And you're not entirely dead set on switching from Windows to Linux. Well, FreeBSD isn't exactly Linux, but this is the same idea, right? So let's go to an actual Linux distribution, because I'm not ready to fuck with this yet. Let's click on Fedora. Let's click on Fedora. What most people are going to be using is KDE. So we're going to go on this. I'm just going to show you, you know, what you could potentially have. Now, I am running Pika OS and I'm running all this stuff, but like, for like a new user, you're not going to have everything I'm going to have. However, I just want to let you know you have options. Which is something that you don't really have too many options for when it comes to Windows. Windows is not giving you as many options as you might think, and they are actually keeping you in their ecosystem by trying to make you use what they're fucking using, right? Sure, yeah, like anti-cheat games will work on Windows for the most part. If you want to, you can dual boot. Dual booting is a thing that you can do. But I want to show you something, because having the ability to choose your distribution and having the ability to have the freedom of choice, which is not something that you get a lot of times when it comes to Windows. I'm gonna be completely honest. They kind of got rid of freedom of choice with a lot of things back then. You don't really have too much of a choice now, because now you're gonna eventually just be stuck with Windows 11. Because Windows 10 LCSC, that's only gonna last 5 more years. After that, that one is done. It's gone. Enterprise, same fucking thing. After a couple years, it's done. It's gone. And no normal user is going to use LTSC or Enterprise. Now, say you're on Fedora, right? Well, of course, you know, this is through the web, but you get to actually get to mess around with the environment. And the environment will end up showing you basically how everything works. Now, you might go, all right, that's cool and all, but how do I play games? Well, not 100%. You might be going, well, how do I play games? Well, you have some options. You have Steam, which Steam works. Steam used to do a thing where you had to like go to settings, compatibility, and enable something. Now you just choose your compatibility tool. Now you just choose your compatibility tool on Linux, and it just works. And you have a plethora of apps you can use. You have quite a bit of stuff. You can use Discord, you can use Heroic, which is the Heroic Games Launcher. This ends up, you know, killing 3 birds with 1 stone. You get access to the Epic Games Store. You get access to the Epic Games Store. You can redeem free games off the Epic Games Store as well. You can do that. You get access to the GOG Store, which is cool. And you get access to Prime Gaming, which is also, you know, if you use it, that's fine. You can access your library, and you can start up just any game you want, and you can get it to working. It may even have a Proton DB thing on the side, because some games do. It just really depends. Now, there's also another program called Luitris. And Luitris gives you the ability to play games by installing them and going through their entire repository. So you have options for that. You also have the compatibility layer option of using the Fogus launcher, which this uses Uemu. This makes the Uemu launcher completely easier to use. You can use Waydroid. Waydroid is an Android emulator app that you can get set up on your computer. And once it loads up, you could then play games like Godzilla Battle Line if you want. Now, the performance might not be amazing, depending on what the kind of game it is, because it's still being developed. But you do have the ability to play games. Not only that, there's a plethora of apps you can use. There's also a thing called Bottles. It's also another compatibility layer you can use. And that's just scraping the surface of everything. Like, there's a thing called Winboat, where you can literally, if you really need to get a Windows app, you can literally install Windows, any version of Windows up here, on Linux in a container. Now, will that work for everything? It won't, of course. You could do web apps, you could do web design, you have the ability to do that, right? You could do video editing. You do video editing. You could do emulation if you want. You can do a lot of things on Linux. You could even play Adventure Quest if you want. That's besides the point, right? Like, you have a lot of options when it comes to, you know, how you're accessing your computer, you know, how you're able to do things, you know, especially being able to use stuff like Slippy, for example. Like, you could do a lot of things on Linux. Now, how do you normally get the software for Linux? Well, you can get it off Discover, which is the App Store. That's what it essentially is. You can go to all applications, you can take a look at everything here. You can update stuff, you can download stuff, right? It's good stuff. You can even download Space Cadet. I had this already, what the fuck? You could play Space Cadet Pinball. which this was ported from Windows XP. So like, you have options. You could do art. You could draw. You could draw on Linux. Like, you could do drawings on Linux if you want to. You could do a lot of things. And I hope people understand that. There are like, there's still like a lot of things you can do. You're not like missing out on really much anything. And the fact that Proton exists, it helps make things even better. Now, there is a thing called my VTuber guide. Now, my VTuber guide helps people out with like Linux guides to VTubing, and helps people out with like getting started. There's a reason as to why I have a list of programs to start people out, so they can at least get their foot in the door when it comes to a lot of things like this. Like, there's even native Linux programs being created like Snake Studio, which I might end up trying out. And there's also a website being made if you're a VTuber. And this doesn't just only apply to VTubing, right? You can use this for streaming too. Because basically, the core fundamentals of VTubing are basically slapped right on top of streaming. So like, if you're not a VTuber, you could just go to installation of your distro, run whatever Windows software you need to. Explanation here with that. OBS, window capture, audio setup, stuff like that. Other useful software. Hey, look, there I am. Interesting. But yeah, you can do a lot of stuff on Linux. That's not the only thing though. Now, you don't actually have to touch the terminal if you don't want to. You probably should maybe learn how to use a terminal, but you could do some pretty cool things with it. You can install like a lot of programs on this. There's a program that I like to use called TopGrade. Now, TopGrade, this will install firmware. It'll install any missing firmware drivers you have for the most part. It will install all your updates on every little single thing you update, and it will make your life a hell of a lot easier. So you do have to use terminal for this, but I do use this. I think it's cool. But yeah, you could definitely install everything. It basically pulls everything where it needs to install, and you're pretty much good to go. But yeah, it's going to start upgrading everything. Pulling stuff from Docker, updating Docker and everything. And see, look, it tells you everything that you've updated. Like stuff from pipx, containers, rustup, cinnamon spices, wageroid, all that stuff. All that good stuff. And Linux does have support for mods. There's a thing called R2 Modman. Any game that's supported on R2 Modman is supported on Linux for modding. You could do modding. Not only that, you can also do modding for other games if you do drag and drop stuff. I'm going to start showing you some games real quick. One of the games that I've been playing lately was Digimon Cyber Sleuth. So yes, there's mod support for this. But it's not the only game you can mod, of course. You can mod a lot of games. And I'm just going to show you some that I have modded on Linux that do support mods. Because if anything, if you could drag and drop and do more mod support, well, it should just work. I got to relaunch it. It didn't recognize my controller. Sometimes games will do that. It's a thing. Regardless, it still works. And it's like the fact that like these games work at all on Linux. Like, these are Windows games running on Linux. So we're gonna load up Digimon, and you're gonna kind of notice that things kind of look different because I'm not using the regular player character. Not only that, there are some modded Digimon. But yeah, that's basically the point. Like, you can mod things to this game. You can mod things. Right? It's really good. But I'm going to show you another mod that I did. We're going to go ahead and go to Mega Man X Dive. Now, X Dive Offline is a game that you can mod. And it'll work. Now, I've had to do a significant amount of things to this game, but it will work. But as you can see, I have some DLC that I probably shouldn't have. Look at this. Look at my money in this game. Look at the characters. Third Armor X. Copy X with mods. Omega. Whole bunch of things. Which I might end up adding other mods to the game too later on. Like, I even have the Monster Hunter characters in here now. Got Ryu. So you can do a lot of things. Like, you could do mods. Mods do work. Now, sometimes mod managers can be a little iffy, and I understand that. Not every mod manager will work, but quite a few of them will. Either through Wine or through Proton. Or through Uemu. Because you have more than one option, basically. There's even custom characters. Like Omnimon, for example. Why is he even in the game? I don't know. But he's in the game. But you get the idea. Mods work. And again, I might have other people talking as well, and they might reiterate the same points. But the whole grand scheme of things with this is that it just works on Linux. That's besides the point, right? There's a lot of options. There's a lot of availability when it comes to using things on Linux. I think that if people were to give it a try, especially on like easier to use distributions like Linux Mint, Pika OS, Nobara, Kashi OS, Pop OS, like OSs that are easy to use are probably the best things that you could start out with. It's the best thing that you can do when it comes to using a Linux distribution. Don't make your life harder than it has to be. And I'm being serious. Don't make it harder than it has to be if you have never used Linux before. And that's what I would recommend. I'd recommend using a really easy to use distribution. Like, for example, Linux Mint. Linux Mint is probably the de facto easiest distribution you can use. It has a really good upgrade and download path with a bunch of stuff. You have different desktop environments you can choose. It doesn't overwhelm you either. You're not overwhelmed. You're given 3 options. You're giving 3 options, right? But more than likely people are going to choose Cinnamon, because Cinnamon's easy to use. You also have Pika OS. Pika OS is more of a hobby distribution, but it gets a lot of things right. And it's very much also easy to use. And you can use your standard ISO if you have an AMD graphics card, or you can use an NVIDIA ISO for your NVIDIA graphics card. And you can choose your edition, whether it's GNOME, KDE, Hyperland, Neri, among other things. There's also Nobara. Nobara is also a really easy to use distribution, because it also gets a lot of things right. There's also CachyOS. And you know what the key thing about all these distributions that I'm choosing? They have optimized defaults. They get a lot of things done before you even have to do them, which is what you want. You don't want to have to download Arch or Ubuntu or Fedora by itself without getting some sort of optimization to it. At least starting out. Or, this is also an option. Now, I will preface this by saying this is probably not the best option, but it is an option, but it's really easy to use. And it actually makes things a little bit easier for you to use than it would be through Linux Mint. Because with Zorin OS, you could just slap an EXD on there, boot it up with Wine, and it should boot. And you can game on it. And it's accredited. And it's also used in schools. And it literally is an alternative to Windows. There's also the option of Pop! OS. Pop! OS is by System76. It's backed by a company. Zorin OS is also a company. Linux Mint is through a community effort. This is by like 2 or 3 people. This is literally by 1 person. This is very much also by a community effort too. But if you want something backed by a company, you got System76. And they could also get a lot of things done. Now, they are a little bit behind Linux Mint right now, but you could still use it. It's still very much usable. You can still use it for streaming. You can still use it for a bunch of things. And if you are really wanting to go down to the very core of simplicity, get Bazite. A lot of people will say don't do it. But if you're starting out, if you were starting out and you're very much not sure what you want to get done, right? Choose Bazite. Bazite is made by also a company-ish kind of thing. Or a community effort. Bazite can be used as a desktop. It's very easy to use. It's probably the easiest thing that you can use on here. Everything would be through Flatpak as well. And I might end up making a video on it later. I don't know. We'll see though. We'll see though. Anyways. But yeah, you have options. You have plenty of options. You know what you have? You know what you have with Windows right now? After the 14th? Let's see what options you have for Windows. Let's just type in Windows, right? Let's see what your options are. Windows 11. Right? This is your option for Windows. If you want an official option. There's also Tiny 11. Which you can use Tiny 11 Builder to make it. Or you could just download it. There's also Windows 10 LTSC. However, this is only going to last like 5 years. Even if that actually. So your time's limited on this. There's also third-party Windows OSs like Atlas OS. Right? You can use this, right? But it's not recommended at all to use it, actually. Fuck Windows, upgrade to Atlas. You're still using Windows. It is a modification on Windows, though. But it's not as fleshed out as like any of these distributions would be. Because like, you know, all these, you're getting your privacy, you're getting your games, you can stream on it. You do a bunch of things. And I think that's all I'm going to really say right now. But you do have options. Now, I'm going to go ahead and just let the other people take it away. Because there are some very special people that have decided to help out when it comes to a video like this. Please listen to what they have to say. What they are saying is the truth. Like I was saying the truth. So, I hope y'all enjoy the rest of the video. Because there's some very special guests up here. And there might be one that you didn't expect. Anyways, I'll be seeing you later. I might even be seeing you at the end of the video. Bye-bye.
Before you make the full swap to Linux, you have to determine if Linux will support your general workflow and or games you want to play. If you hopelessly rely on Adobe products and do not want to try anything else, if you religiously play online games with invasive anti-cheat like Fortnite, Valorant, League of Legends, or Rainbow Six Siege, Linux is not for you. Turn off the video right now. However, if you're willing to put in the work and make your desktop fit your needs, are able to do some research in different free and open source software that either you already use on Windows or some similar equivalent, and enough time and patience to set everything up, I would recommend giving Linux a shot. I am very opinionated and biased, so I'll give you my personal recommendations on what distro, desktop environment, and programs you should start out with. For distro selection, I wholeheartedly recommend Pica OS as your first Linux distro. It is based off of Debian, one of the oldest and rock-solid distros out there, but optimized and streamlined enough to where you can get the maximum amount of performance right out of the box. Most of the built-in software included, stuff like its update manager and stuff like that are all GUI based. So you don't even need to open up a terminal if you really do not want to. Though I recommend you learn how to operate a terminal, as it will absolutely enrich your Linux experience and allow you to do some fine-tuning, exact updates and software installation, other essential things. I use Arch Linux for me personally, but I would not recommend that for a first-time Linux user because it is very complicated. If you don't know what you're doing, I just recommend Pica OS. For your desktop environment, there are a few solid options you can pick from. When I first started Linux, I used XFCE, a lightweight desktop environment that has just enough for modern desktop usage. And if you're running a very old system, I would recommend using that. However, for general users, I recommend using KDE Plasma, which is the most feature-rich, up-to-date, and just nice-to-use DE out there. It is basically just a more updated version of Windows UI, specifically Windows 7, and you can customize, or rice as we call it, as much or as little of the desktop as you want. You can even turn it into a near exact copy of Windows XP's UI if you're especially insane, though I do not recommend using that. For programs, the essentials most people use are already available on Linux natively. Stuff like Steam, Discord, your web browser of choice, with the exception of Opera GX, which you shouldn't be using that browser anyway, as well as basic Office software in Microsoft Office via the LibreOffice suite. All of those are on Linux. If you are a content creator, stuff like OBS, Audacity, Stream Controller for your Elgato Stream Deck, GIMP, Handbrake, and Krita are all available for you to use right away, most of which will be available via Flatpaks, which is the most widely used distro-agnostic software packaging standard out there. Basically, think of it how you download an app from the App Store on iPhone or Google Play from Android, but for your PC. You're just installing applications on your PC via that method. It's the simplicity and installation of programs from mobile devices on your PC, and it's available on Linux, and it is primarily how I install a lot of my programs. If you're a VTuber like I am, most of the software you use that is available is already on there. If you're a live 2D VTuber, Face Tracker plus VTube Studio is basically all you need. An equivalent exists for 3D VTubers as well, which is, using XR Animator or Warudo. For more information on setting up VTuber software, I recommend checking out the Linux VTuber guide written by KyloNeko, with an updated version coming soonish. Other programs I recommend getting, get yourself VPN, specifically Proton VPN. Your music streaming service of choice is on there as well. I have Tidal, so there's a native client for Tidal that supports lossless audio. Though if you haven't canceled your Spotify account yet, there is a client for that out there on Flatpak. And a whole host of retro game emulators natively available on Linux. The neat thing about modern emulators is that they are free and open source, or FOSS, so they are super easily portable to any platform, meaning popular emulators like Dolphin, PCSX2, Mednafen, Blastem, XEMU, and RPCS3 are all available without needing to go through like Proton to run them. Do keep in mind that when you switch to Linux, it will not be a one-to-one replacement for Windows. You are basically learning an entirely different operating system with new standards and paths for your workflow. So come at this with a bit of patience and a willingness to learn new things, and you'll be okay.
Alright, so why did I switch? Well, my Windows install was approaching 10 years old, and it was starting to show all the cracks you'd expect of an install that old. So I figured I'd give Linux another go. I'd given it a couple of swings in the past, but not really had it stick. But with Windows 11 looming over me and a dying install of Windows 10, I figured it was about time to give it another try. What's been good? So installation was generally easy, even for my distro of choice. More on that later. After some help with my initial setup on day one, thank you, Kylo, I was back up and streaming again pretty quickly. Developing in the OS that my work deploys our system to has made my job simpler. In Windows, I was managing WSL and Docker containers just to do some test builds, so it's really improved the speed of my workflow, just simplifying that whole process. Gaming has come a long way as well, I've found. I've scarcely run into any issues playing the things that I actually want to play, and resources like ProtonDB have provided enough information for any time I've wanted to get a game to know if it's going to work out the box or if it's not, what I need to tweak, or whether it's just avoid it for now until they get around to building some adaptations for it, which is getting rarer and rarer, thanks to, Proton and the Steam Deck and the need for Linux gaming now. It's been pretty reliable for it, I'd say. I've always been a big fan of writing and operating system customization and the like. It's been a lot of fun decorating my desktop manager to be exactly what I want it to be. Wayland, by the way. And the tiling with the per-screen workspaces that I've gotten out of Hyperland have been really useful. They've been massive for my productivity. It's not a feature I ever used over in Windows. I don't think their implementation hit it quite as well as some of the ones on Linux. And even if something can't really be done right now in Linux, if I'm running up against a piece of software that's unavailable, my Windows install is just still there. It's sitting on another drive, ready to go. You can always dual boot. You really don't have to go all or nothing with it. It's pretty much harm-free to at least dip your toes in and give it a try, I'd say. So, some challenges. Aside from the usual minutiae that one runs into when swapping to any operating system, the main challenge that I faced just came to mind. So, the challenges, well, aside from the usual minutiae you run into from swapping to any operating system that you're not familiar with, really, the main challenge I actually faced just came down to my choice of distro, NixOS. Nix has provided me a lot of the reliability that I need in my line of work to make sure that my PC will be up in the morning, but, there's a handful of things that didn't work out of the box. Most things do. It has the largest package manager, I think, of any Linux distribution out there. Just a handful of things need a little bit of extra configuration than I'd be used to. But to be honest, I'd recommend that most people go for something like Ubuntu or Pop! OS, especially if it's their first time. Arch, if you're a little bit more experienced and just don't want the rigmarole of this sort of config-defined OS. But Honestly, it's the only challenge that I've had are basically self-inflicted. On the whole, I found the Switch to be a lot easier and more forgiving this time around than any previous time. There's more support, both community and software, than there's ever been. I'd say, really, if you want to give Linux a good college try, you might just find yourself like me, with no desire to ever switch back.
Hi, I'm Ren. I am a VTuber who has been using Linux for about 6 or so years now. I've been using it for VTubing basically the entire time I've had it, and I am one of, if not the first VTuber to use Linux. There may have been earlier ones, but I couldn't find any on YouTube when I started, so I assume that's how it goes. Feel free to prove me wrong. First thing I want to go over is gaming. I've personally never had much of a problem when I swapped to Linux when it came to gaming. I never have cared about online competitive games, even before I was even a PC gamer, when I was back on just consoles only. I had like the Call of Duties and the Halos, and I just never cared to play them online. The closest thing I did was Call of Duty Zombies with some friends online. And even then, I would very rarely ever go into just random matches and just play with random people. I've just never cared for that. I started using Linux right after Proton released, so when I swapped over, I didn't have a whole lot of Steam games because I was still a fairly new PC gamer. I'd only had my own gaming PC for about 2, maybe 3 years, and all the games I had worked because they were all just older single-player games. Nowadays, though, not really an issue. You just go on Steam, click a game, click play, and it's probably just gonna work, especially if it's just a single-player game. I've gotten games released on day one, and they just worked out of the box without a problem. One of the most notables being Persona 3 Reload. When that released, I bought it day one, and it immediately worked. Out of all of my games I have, which is hundreds and hundreds of games, I don't actually know the exact number, but I know it's like at least 400 or 500 games. I only have 2 that have problems, and those problems are fairly minor. This is excluding games that have later gone and added things like a kernel-level anti-cheat for online stuff. But those 2 games are Psychonauts and Catherine. Catherine has a problem where you need to use a custom build of Proton called Proton GE, and that only recently started really working without any problems. I struggled for years to get that one running, but for some reason, now with Proton GE and the latest version of it, I can get it to run without a problem, and it just kind of works. So I'm planning to play through that myself very soon after owning the game for like 4 or 5 years. The other game, though, is Psychonauts. Psychonauts has a really annoying problem where it doesn't want to show controller inputs, which is really a problem for me specifically because I like playing most games, if not all games, on a controller rather than keyboard and mouse. If you prefer playing on a keyboard and mouse, that issue doesn't exist anymore because you would want to see keyboard and mouse anyway. Don't know why it has that issue. There's been an open issue with it on the GitHub for Proton for a while now. People aren't sure if it's a game issue or if it's a Proton issue. They're still trying to figure that out. I just got it on PS2 and started playing that version instead. So, the sequel isn't affected. Psychonauts 2 is totally fine. It is just the original Psychonauts that has this problem. And again, if you play with keyboard and mouse, the problem no longer exists. The next thing to talk about is streaming. Streaming is pretty much the same. Nothing really changes between Windows and Linux because you're still using OBS Studio, you're still using pretty much all the same plugins. Basically every single popular plugin has a Linux version. The only real difference is if you're one of the people that use VSTs for your audio. VSTs on Linux are significantly worse solely because there are nowhere near as many on Linux. VSTs are unfortunately not an agnostic, universal file type. They don't just work on everything. They have to be made specifically for the operating system they're going to be used on. So if you have a Windows VST, it will not work on Mac, it will not work on Linux. Same thing as if you have a Mac VST. It will not work on Linux. It will not work on Windows. And if you have a Linux VST, it will not work on Windows. It will not work on Mac. That's kind of annoying. That is a bit of a problem. That's more so just a problem with the format of VSTs in general, though. More so than the fact of Linux. If they made a Linux VST, it would work just as well in the Linux version of OBS. It's just there are nowhere near as many Linux VSTs. So that's really the only drawback when it comes to OBS on Linux. Now, speaking of OBS and recording and streaming, let's talk about video editing. Video editing's a bit of a tricky one. You can make a workflow that is just as easy to use as it would be on Windows, but it's not going to be the same workflow that you are currently using on Windows. It's just not going to carry over, unfortunately. You're going to need to swap out some programs, you're going to need to change some of that workflow up, but you can make a workflow that is just as streamlined, depending on what software you decide to use. The best setup that you can get for editing on Linux is to have a system with an NVIDIA GPU and to buy DaVinci Resolve Studio for like $300. That is going to give you the least amount of headaches. It's going to have the most stuff that just works out of the box and immediately is ready to go. The only thing with that kind of setup you're going to need to worry about is your audio codec. The normal AAC audio codec just does not work right on the Linux version of DaVinci Resolve, even in the Studio Edition, so you just need to either record your audio in a different codec like PMC, or have a tool like Handbrake to convert clips from using AAC to using PMC for your audio instead. Once you do that, it's just as streamlined as Windows. You will notice no difference. Now, if you don't want to go in and buy a $300 program, or you don't have an NVIDIA GPU, there is a little more prep work you gotta do. You can still do it, you just have to do a little more setup. The biggest thing you're going to need to do is that you're probably going to want to use some sort of container for DaVinci Resolve instead of just installing it directly. You've got a couple options with things like DaVinci Box, which is specifically for DaVinci Resolve, and DistroBox, which is what DaVinci Box uses on the back end. These are things that are a little more complicated to set up. You will have to do it in a command line. It's not a whole lot of commands. You'll be able to go to the GitHub page and just copy and paste stuff. But it is something that's going to look more intimidating. But you only have to do it once until there's an update for DaVinci Resolve, and then you've got to run one more command for DaVinci Box. But after that, you never have to touch it again while you're using it. You don't need to open a terminal and do a bunch of hacky stuff just to make it run every time. You do it once, and then you have an icon that opens the same way any other program would open. It's just a little more prep work. Now, if your footage is all AV1 and you have like a modern NVIDIA 40 series GPU or an AMD 7000 or 90 series GPU, and you can just record all your footage with AV1 instead of H.264 or H.265, you don't even need to use the paid version of Resolve. It'll work with the free version, which is awesome because I have the free version and it's great to just drag and drop clips in there. I do need to do more editing in Resolve. I don't feel confident enough in it to post any videos I've done in it. Instead, I've done all my editing in a free tool called Kdenlive. Kdenlive is a great editor, especially if you just need simpler edits like what I tend to need. And it just is on any Linux distribution. You just open your software store or software center or app store or whatever it's called. You search Kdenlive, you click the install button, you're done. You never have to think about it. You don't have to hunt down downloads. You don't have to hunt down sketchy links or anything. It's just in the app store, you click install the same way you would on your phone. It's great. Now, speaking of your desktop, let's talk about the customization. Customizing your desktop is very dependent on what desktop you have. Doesn't really matter. But if you have GNOME as your desktop, you're not going to be able to edit as much stuff. It's really meant to be, hey, this is a default. This is how everything's going to look. By default, we want it to all look the same consistent way. Some people love that. Some people hate that. Some people are indifferent to that. Just it really depends on your preferences. I, however, have always used KDE. Even before I was using a distribution of Linux that came with KDE, I went and figured out how to install KDE because I like to tweak colors. I really like to tweak colors. If you look at my desktop, which I'll swap to right now, this is a custom color scheme I use. So if I open up like my file browser, you can see I have a lot of stuff. I have quite a lot of things. There are so many things, and I've made this whole custom color scheme that I can actually show you in my settings. This is not the default color scheme, so if we go down to my colors and themes, and we go to my colors, I call it Absolute Dark. I couldn't think of a better name. That's a terrible name for it, actually. I need to think of something better. But I went with this, I call it an off black. It's not a all the way dark black. It's just a super dark gray. And I based it off of another color scheme that I forget what it was called. The original color scheme might have been called Absolute Dark, and that's what I based it off of. That might be why I called it this, and I just didn't bother to think of another name. And then I went and I just chose an accent color, which gave this pinkish red color that I really like. It's become my kind of go-to accent color for most stuff now. But it's a really, really good system if you like to tweak little things like this. So like I can also go to like my application style and I could do different styles of things. I can make like an old Windows 98 sort of look. We can go to here and I can have different colors for like my taskbar, different icon sets if I wanted to. For the longest time I was using Paprius, is that it? No, Flat Remix. This is what I was using for the longest time. This color, this icon set right here. I adore this icon set. It did not transition to KDE 6 very well, so I stopped using it, went back to the default. And speaking of the default dark theme is really good. I really like the default dark theme. I just wanted it to be a little more black and less blue tinted, pretty much. But yeah, customization on Linux is fantastic. You can get something like KDE and tweak almost anything you want. Or, if you hate customizing it, the defaults are so solid you never have to change a single thing if you don't want to. It is this great, I think KDE puts it best, it's this great stance of powerful when you want it, but simple by default. It works really well in default, it's not overwhelming, but if you want to go in there and you want to get into the weeds, there's nothing stopping you from tweaking almost every little aspect of your theme to make something crazy. You can even get stuff like tiling window managers, which let you customize everything. Like, just look up screenshots of people with like i3 and Hyperland and just see how different each and every person's setup is from each other. At least up until recently, where now everything is a minimalist anime background and a solid color bar with some sort of accent color. They found one really good looking theme and now everyone's just kind of copying each other. But you don't have to, is the thing. You can make it totally completely different. It's just trends tend to happen, and right now we're in the middle of a trend for how people like to style their stuff. But moving on from that, let's talk about the ease of use, especially for like entry-level distros, which is honestly a phrase I don't really like. I feel like it's kind of misleading. The idea of an entry-level distro is just whatever flavor of Linux tends to prefer graphical applications to command line tools. That's the only difference. Everything else is kind of irrelevant. And personally, I think if you want to swap to Windows, pick a version of Linux, and then just don't swap from it until you figure out how to use it. don't listen to anyone who says like, oh, you should swap to this because it does yada, 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 or you should use this because yada, yada is easier. Don't listen to any of that. Just pick a version and use it. Typically, I would recommend pick ones that are really well known and usually ones backed by a company as well so that you know they'll always have developers behind it. Not to say that smaller niche distros are anything bad. I know a lot of people love stuff like Pika OS, and I personally use one called Nobara, but it's not something that I think a new user should use because these are smaller teams with less support and more edge cases you'll run into. And I don't think new users should deal with that. I think those are more suited for people who have been on Linux for years, like myself. That's why I'm fine with running Nobara on my system, but I wouldn't really recommend it to a brand new Linux user because it does run into some weird edge case issues that you need to know a little bit more about to fix, or at least feel comfortable knowing the deeper stuff to fix it. Because a lot of the times when something breaks in Nobara, it needs some command line stuff to fix it, which new users get really scared of and they don't want to do that. And that's totally understandable. If you don't know how to use something, it is scary. So that's why I'd recommend, my recommendation personally for new users, usually is just plain vanilla Fedora KDE. KDE Desktop is something that's going to feel familiar enough and it's going to let you tweak all the stuff you want to tweak if you want it to. But Fedora gets updates really quick for things like drivers, which is really good because most of the people I'm recommending Linux to are like PC gamers. They're going to want the newest drivers. They're going to want the newest features for their screen. They're going to want that high resolution, that variable refresh rate, HDR stuff, which some other recommendations like Linux Mint just aren't quick enough to update for those types of people. Now, if you're recommending something for just an old laptop that you just need to function, maybe your mom or your grandmother's going to use it, Linux Mint is still the king for that sort of situation. Like, there is nothing that has been better for that. They've got graphical applications for literally anything you can think of. I don't think I've found a single thing that Linux Mint doesn't have a graphical UI for, which is insanely impressive. I can see why so many people love Cinnamon for that reason alone. Which, if you don't know, Cinnamon is the name of Linux Mint's desktop environment. The Linux Mint team are the main developers of Cinnamon. Linux Mint is like the showcase for Cinnamon, but you can use Cinnamon on any distro you want. But back to why I recommend Fedora for most people, at least for PC gamers, is that these are the kinds of people that are familiar enough with a computer that I feel like they can run one or two commands after they install it, and then they never have to touch a terminal again. And since they're on a distribution like Fedora that gets updates really quick, they're always going to have access to the newest drivers and the newest features for everything that they're going to expect from their computer, because they're gamers. They want all the fancy, shiny features. They want them as soon as they can get them, and Fedora will get you those updates as soon as they're out, or soon enough. If they really, really want them the second they're available, they could use something like Arch, but Arch is going to be a lot more of... I use a car analogy a lot when describing these. Arch is like driving a manual car. If you know what you're doing, it's going to be fantastic for you. It's going to do everything you want without any drawbacks. But if you don't know how to drive a stick shift, you're going to be up shit's creek without a paddle. If all you know is an automatic and you just want something that it's configured for you when it comes out, so even if it takes a couple days or a couple weeks longer, just go with Fedora. You usually don't have to wait more than a couple days, though, at least in my experience of using Fedora-based stuff. You get stuff like, oh, it released on Monday, you'll have it before the end of the week. And that's fine. It's not that big deal to wait another 2-3 days to get something. Now on to the more specific to me sort of subjects, being vtubing. VTubing is something I have done for years. Basically, the entire time I've installed Linux, I have been VTubing on it. As I mentioned earlier, I'm one of the first, if not the first, at least from what I found on YouTube, Linux users to start VTubing on Linux specifically. I'm not saying about Linux. I know there was, I think Cyan started VTubing before me, but she was using macOS and was just making some stuff about Linux rather than doing it all on Linux itself. Whereas I was doing everything on Linux. I may be wrong about this. Maybe Cyan was after me. Maybe she was using Linux specifically before me. But from when I searched like Linux VTubers all over YouTube, and I couldn't find anything, which is what made me decide like, oh, you know what? Maybe I'll try to do it all on Linux and see how that goes. And surprisingly, it worked, which at the time was kind of shocking. It was like, oh, I expected this to break, and it didn't. But it's been a wild ride for that. Things started off with almost nothing working right. I was very lucky in that I finally got VCFace to work. But I only got it to work by using the OpenCFace face tracker, which is made by the same developer as VCFace, but OpenCFace is an open source face tracker. VCFace is a closed source proprietary application for your model. It uses the OpenCFace tracker. The built-in tracker in VCFace did not work. It was OpenCFace built into it, but it just couldn't find my webcam because Wine does not like to find USB devices for some reason when it comes to webcams. I don't know why. You'd have to ask someone smarter than me as to why that's the case. But instead, what I could do is run OpenCFace, which was a Python script, in a Python container in a terminal, and have that see my webcam, and then send that as a local server to VCFace. It was a super janky, super weird setup, but it did work, and I believe I made a video about it. I think my first video shows me doing exactly that. Then later on, as things started to improve, I got a Live 2D model, and there was some Live 2D apps that came out on Steam. I got a couple free ones, I tried them out. The one I used initially was called PRPR Live, which, as far as I know, does not exist anymore. I think that one shut down and it got delisted. I'd have to double check to be certain, but I'm pretty sure that's what happened. And it was great. It just worked out the box. It found my webcam. I don't know how, but it did. And it just worked. I believe at one point, though, I did have to go back to using the terminal. Then we got the release of vtube Studio, which, if you don't know, has become the de facto go-to, this is the application you use for Live 2D. It is a really good application. I've got it. It was free when it released, and then you just bought a $10 DLC, I think it's like $15 now, to get rid of the watermark. And I went ahead and bought the watermark removal as well, because it was worth it at the time. I thought it was absolutely worth supporting. And the dev, Denchi, is fantastic. They would help me out with the issues I was having on Linux, even though it wasn't a supported platform, just because they thought it was cool that I had gotten it to work, even though all I did was select a Proton version. Denchisoft eventually released a file that would be needed to get facecam tracking working again through using OpenCFace, because it just randomly broke one day. It used to just work and then it stopped. It needed a file, and if it saw that file, it would read from a local server instead, and that is what got it working again, and you could still download that ip.txt file from the GitHub server that Denchisoft puts stuff on. The entirety of VTube Studio is not open source in the slightest. They literally couldn't open source it if they wanted to because they use Live 2D. Live 2D literally has in their contract that you can't share any of their source code, which would make the app utterly unusable without. So they couldn't open source that even if they wanted to. But then after that, I went back to using a 3D model. And around this time, we started to see some Linux native applications show up. Things like vtube, which unfortunately no longer is in development. Now we have a new one that's being worked on called Snek Studio that I need to do a proper look at, even though I did a little bit of testing here and there. I had some problems. I think there were problems with my model rather than the application. I opened an issue about it. I then forgot about the issue about it. The issue got closed because I never responded. Oops. I need to go back and do proper testing on that when I get some free time. But now it's gotten to the point where even Windows native applications for VTubing, 95% of their features just work if you run them in Wine or Proton. I'm currently using VeniOkojo, which I just threw it into Lutris, told it, hey, use this version of Wine or Proton, and then I just click the play button and it works. I have an iPhone for tracking, and I literally just plug it in, put the app on there for the tracking, put in the IP addresses just like you would if you were using it on Windows, and it just works. It tracks my face. I did all the fancy blend shapes for it. I didn't do it. I paid someone to do it. And now my setup is just as easy to use on Linux as it would be on Windows. I don't have to worry about any janky webcam shenanigans because I swapped to this iPhone, and I was like, I don't want to deal with these anymore. And then someone made a face tracker app that you can just install from your app store. You literally just go on your Linux distro's App Store Software Center, look up, I think it's literally just called Face Tracker, and you click install, and now you've got an app that does the face tracking. It just works. So all of my janky solutions that I had used over the years, no longer needed. You just download this app and hit play, and you're done. It's gotten so easy now. It's so good. I am so incredibly impressed with the community for making these tools so much easier to use in such a short span of time. Like, think about it. Over the course of like 3 or 4 years, it went from a super hacky together workaround to get something that works for VTubing to now just having, all right, download this app, press play. Okay, you're done. It's great. I honestly love it. And I really hope it continues to improve. And I'm going to keep testing stuff. I'm going to be making more videos about this kind of software, about the intricacies of how these communities work. I want to make videos talking to people about these things. But that's a subject for another matter. Let's move on to some more things about switching from Windows to Linux as a VTuber. Now, as much as I keep glazing Linux and talking about how fantastic and wonderful it is, it's not without its problems. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like Linux has no issues at all. It absolutely does. It definitely has issues. Anyone who tells you Linux is flawless is lying. That said, I think the issues that Linux has are much better to deal with than the issues Windows has, solely because you can get a very clear answer as to why or why not something works, and whether or not it can be fixed, as compared to Windows, where you just kind of sit there and shrug your shoulders and go like, I don't know, maybe it'll get fixed. Hope it will. Usually it does, but you still never know for certain until it actually does get fixed. The main issue we have with Linux, though, is hardware. Not common hardware, but specialty hardware, exotic hardware, things like capture cards, things like audio interfaces, those sort of things. Things like specialty audio devices, specialty streaming devices. I have an item called what's it called again? It's just called Elite Motion. It's just called Elite Motion. It is the original Elite Motion, the silver one. It's used as a 3D camera for like hand tracking. It does not work on any version of Linux except Ubuntu. Only Ubuntu works. I have tried for months to get it working on Fedora, and I just cannot do it. Instead, if you want hand tracking, just get a webcam and use an application that can use Google Media Pipe for body tracking. It'll be way easier. It won't be quite as good, but it'll be close enough, and you'll save a hell of a lot of headache. The main things that I've seen that have problems, though, for the longest time, were capture cards. And this has improved greatly. A lot of modern capture cards do now work on Linux because they'll work as just a generic UVC device, which is just a generic USB camera. For the longest time, Elgato was really bad about this. I have an Elgato GPU, or capture card GPU. Yes, Elgato made GPUs. I have an Elgato capture card, the HD60S, HD60 Plus. But nowadays, you can buy stuff like like a $60 capture card from EVGA. You plug it into your Linux machine and it just works. You can buy stuff from like AverMedia that are PCIe capture cards, and most of them just work. There's a couple that don't. You'll have to check to make sure. But that's honestly the biggest problem is just exotic hardware. You need to check and see if it'll work, and you should be prepared to possibly have to swap out a couple pieces of hardware. I know for a while, stuff like the Scarlett audio interfaces weren't working, but I'm pretty sure that's no longer the case. I'm pretty sure they do work now. They just weren't working like a couple of years ago. Another thing that for the longest time you weren't able to use was stuff like the Elgato Stream Deck. Now, if you have a alternative brand for it, I know there are a couple other brands that do the same thing. As far as I know, those still don't work, but the actual Elgato Stream Deck you can use in Linux now because there's tons of third-party tools that are just as good, if not better, than the official Windows app, which is insane. If you want to use the official Windows app, you still can't do that. I think it still does not work in Wine, but the third-party ones get you all the same features, or at least nearly all the same features. A good percentage of audio interfaces now pretty much all just work out of the box. You just plug them in. Again, you're going to want to double check. It's not perfect. Microphones you typically don't have to worry about because what really matters is what they're plugged into rather than the mic itself. If your mic needs special hardware in order to work, that special hardware might not work, even if the mic itself might. So double check those sort of things. But that's really the only problem with hardware. It's just weird edge case hardware. Webcams are pretty much fine. Adapters for turning an DSLR camera into a webcam input, that's a bit more hit or miss. Again, you want to make sure it's a capture card that's UVC, and then it'll work just fine. And the last thing I want to touch on is going to be audio. Audio. It is a weird world for audio on Linux. Some things about the Linux audio system are significantly better than Windows. Some things about the Linux audio system are significantly worse than Windows. So it's this really weird place of you'll get really big improvements, but also some trade-offs where stuff is not as good as it should be. That said, it is also constantly improving. I mean, every year it gets better and better. And now I think the trade-offs are so minimized that it's really only a problem if you're on weaker hardware. And that's not to say that they shouldn't fix that. They absolutely should. But they only have so many resources to do so. If you really want to see audio improve on Linux, please donate money to Pipewire. Pipewire is the audio backend that pretty much everything uses now. They are a fantastic project with a lot of really good features, and I'll go over some of them. The biggest one for it is device management. So on Linux, you can control your audio by using a graph to choose what devices connect where and what devices output where. This is fantastic. This is so much better than Windows. I cannot stress this enough how much I use this every single day. In fact, I'll show you. This is my audio right now as I'm recording. You can see all of these effects and stuff in this little pedal board rack or audio rack. And if I go to my patch bay, you can see how different things connect to different stuff. So these are my mic inputs, the left and right. They go into this effect, which goes into this effect, which goes into this effect, which goes to this microphone, which then connects to OBS. And that is how I capture stuff. Now, I didn't set this up by default. A lot of stuff like the microphone are a virtual source that I made, and there's a bunch of advanced things you can do. You can see VNAN connects to my alert source, which connects to here. And this alert source will also, when an alert goes off, connect over to OBS. I just don't have a source for it in my recording scene. I also have one where I have a gain filter, so I can make the volume louder for Discord, because Discord likes to make my mic really quiet for some reason. So I just added a gain so I can turn it up. And I also have a different one for games. So a certain game, if it wants a microphone input, I will go and I'll connect the end of this over into this, and then this will connect to whatever game. Or I'll just tell it to choose FX microphone, because that's a lot easier. If it lets me choose that, great. If it doesn't let me choose that, sometimes I have to use a different source. Kind of weird, but whatever. Games are weird. Everyone does stuff differently. But having all these options A lot of people will never use this, but for those of us who do use this, this is a lifesaver. This makes our lives so much easier and so much better. I can do things like tell OBS, hey, capture this game audio, not the entire desktop. And then I'll just have the game audio also output to my headphones so that I can hear it. I can go to my rack and I can have all these dials to do all these crazy effects, or go in and do, so like say if I want to do this crazy audio distribution and change how the equalization is. You don't have to do any of that, but just having the ability to right there is fantastic. Or you can do none of that and it just capture it normal like you would on Windows. You don't have to do any of these advanced features, but they're there by default if you do. You can use things like, that was one called Carla, that is for a different audio backend called Jack, which I use for some plugins. The main one you're going to want to use is called QPW Graph. This application is incredible, especially if you're brand new to Linux and you want to get into some more advanced streaming setup. If you're just a regular user of Linux, none of this applies. You just use it as default and you don't have to worry about a thing. The most you have to worry about is like clicking. Hey, is my microphone working? Is it muted? Yes? No? It works? Cool. Oh, what about this? Yeah, cool. Here are my sources. Yeah, I want to mute this one. Or I want to go over here. Oh yeah, this game. Yeah, I want to mute it. Okay, now it's unmuted. The same as Windows. That's all you have to worry about. Again, this isn't to say it's without problems. It has problems. Pipewire tends to have this problem where your audio will get like this weird crackly effect. Kylo spliced in some clips of this happening to PewDiePie and Brody.
And features. I feel like my attention
Wait, was that my audio breaking or his? Wait, is that Linux or is that PewDiePie peak Pipewire Linux audio?
anything useful. All these apps and features.
even he can't escape Pipewire problems.
It's just
That weird crackling effect is something that happens on lower core count CPUs more often than not. I've had it happen on occasion on mine, but it's a lot less common if you have a really high core count CPU, which I tend to go towards because I tend to do a lot of stuff running at once, so I want the ability to run a lot of stuff at once. So because of this, Pipewire does tend to favor more expensive hardware, which is a little bit of a problem. If you have the money to spare, please donate to Pipewire so they can work on improving performance on these lower core count CPUs, because that is a thing they definitely want to fix. They just are really struggling to get the budget in order to do it. That's part of why development on Pipewire is so slow, because they have to do it within tiny budgets that they are allotted each year. Now, depending on who you are, this crackling effect can either be a minor annoyance or a complete and total deal breaker. It really depends on you. But personally, I think that it is something that is worth the trade-off, because unless you are doing like music production, it's not something you really have to worry about. And if you are doing something like music production, you do have alternatives like Jack, which you can use instead for your music production stuff, and that will be absolutely rock solid. But that is pretty much going to cover everything I wanted to say about using Linux and swapping to it from Windows. My experience is not the same as everyone's. This is just my personal anecdote, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. But personally, I do think that the handful of trade-offs you have to make are worth the massive improvement for your system not getting in your way, actually listening to what you want to do, letting you have something that makes it easier to get done the things you want to get done. and customizing. God, I love customizing. That's the biggest appeal for me. I love customizing.
Nowadays, I basically only game on Linux. There are some exceptions to the games I got cheaply on my PS5 or exclusives, things like that, but everything else, I game on my Linux system. So when you're playing a game on Steam, you're making use of a tool known as Proton. This is ProtonDB. This is a community effort to talk about game compatibility, things you might need to tweak, and settings you might need to set, and things like that. And this is a great place to come. But nowadays, I don't even bother checking this for a lot of games, unless the game has anti-cheat, in which case, a lot of the time they won't work. Things like Valorant, for example, that's going to be an issue. But if the game doesn't have anti-cheat, or the game's a single-player game, most of the time, I can just buy it on launch, and it just works. I don't need to tweak it, I don't need to do anything to it, it's just fine. And this Proton tool, this is based on another open source tool that you can actually use with basically anything else. So you can play your games from your Epic library, from your GOG library, you can bring in things that you maybe ripped from a CD, things like that, and all of this stuff is using the same tooling that is being improved upon by everyone. And most games, there are exceptions, absolutely, but most games you want to play, you don't even have to think about them. If you're the kind of person who likes making use of Wallpaper Engine, you really like to customize your system, there is a plugin to use it on certain places on Linux, but Linux is second to none when it comes to customization. If you want to customize everything on your system, there's nothing better to use. You can pick an entirely different distro base from what I'm using, and you want to have, GNOME on Ubuntu. You want to have a Fedora for a cleaner version of GNOME. You want to start without a desktop and use something like Arch Linux, and then build everything up from the ground up. You can do all these things. You can pick the GNOME desktop, which is a more curated macOS-like experience. You can pick KDE for a more traditional desktop experience. You can pick a tiling window manager for something that you've probably never seen on Windows. All of these things are possible, and so much more. And then you can pick and choose all of the different tooling you want. Nothing's being forced upon you. You can take as much or as little as you want, and really make the system your own. When it comes to video editing, the best thing in the open source space is known as Kdenlive. It is a very solid video editor. It is not the greatest thing out there, but this will do the job. But if you want a more professional grade video editor, DaVinci Resolve is available on Linux. Lightworks is available on Linux. There are tools like this which you can make use of, and they work really well. If you're more inclined to try things that are open source, there are plenty of other things besides Kdenlive. There's things like OpenShot and Flowblade, and you can really find the thing that fits your use case. But from my experience, I've been making videos for quite a while now on Linux, Kdenlive is the most powerful thing available, and it's the thing that most people tend to talk about. One of the issues you are going to run across is there will be software that you want to use that is not available on Linux. It is not as bad as it used to be. Nowadays, most of the core things you want are going to work, because most of the core things you want are probably web applications anyway. Of course, you have your browsers. If you really want to use Edge, even Edge is going to be available, but you have your Discords, your Steam, you have your Epic client. There's not actually the Epic client. You can run a thing called the Heroic Launcher. It gets you all of your Epic games. All of this stuff is available, but you are going to run into things where you need to make a choice. Do I want to try to get this working through Wine, the thing we use for gaming, or do I want to try to find something which mostly fits my use case? It's a choice you will have to make. Luckily though, a lot of this software available on Linux also does have a Windows version as well. So if you want to try things out before you move and, see what it's like before you actually do so, that's also an option you have available as well. I often talk about building your own experience being a good thing. At the same time though, you are going to have to make some choices if you're going to use Linux. You're not going to have everything just handed to you as the Windows operating system. You have to decide, okay, what distro am I going to use? What desktop am I going to use? What software am I going to use on these projects? And how do I want my experience to actually be? There are more curated, opinionated projects out there where they do everything for you, but even then, you still need to decide that this is the route I'm going to go. There is a lot more in the way of choice for Linux, and that's not a bad thing, but it is something you're going to have to get used to.
Oh, alright. So you managed to watch the entire video. Congratulations. Have you decided to change to Linux yet? Have you even chose your Linux distribution? If you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and put in a comment down below, as well as follow all these wonderful people that even went in this video to begin with. If you have even any more questions and you're also wanting to do VTubing, also go ahead and check out the Linux Guide to VTubing, as well as the associated website and the Discords. Be looking forward to seeing you there. Anyways, happy Linux. Windows 10 is dead. Yeah. Ah.